Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and today I wanted to talk about what most people get wrong about the Enneagram. Now, this episode is partially inspired by the questions that I get most often, and some of the same questions come up over and over again in different groups. And sometimes I want to take the answer and shout it from the rooftop so that everyone can hear, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions, maybe some misinformation, or just poor use of a tool like this out there. And listen, this is no judgment to the people that are asking these questions and workshops and things like that. There are a lot of reasons why they're asking these, including those that I just mentioned. But first, I would say, the information out there sometimes isn't always good. I think the internet and social media really waters down the meaning of a really powerful tool like this. And I'm not against having some fun with our Enneagram types, but as people are getting to type, they often hear a lot of things that kind of throw them off of their own path. I also think sometimes people's friends tell them things, and sometimes their friends are just wrong. So more so, I think that people kind of get hung up in ways of thinking about a tool like this, because we live in this culture where people tell you the answers with a lot of conviction and a lot of confidence all the time. And we kind of take things at face value when somebody says it, especially someone in a position of some kind of authority. Or maybe said another way, we look outside of ourselves for authority a lot. And this tool is really about looking inward. And so, of course, there are some things about the tool that you might need to know from a technical standpoint. But I really want to break down some of these myths and misconceptions, or kind of the low quality information that's out there, so that you can use this tool in a way that's actually really helpful and not harmful, in a way that's reflective and not super prescriptive. Because at the end of the day, Enneagram is about knowing yourself deeply, and it's really intended to be a tool that you can use for this exploration of self, not a tool that gives you all of these definitive answers about who you are. There are lots of tools that will give you a report or a readout or a combination of letters or a list of strengths, and those are great too. In fact, I have a whole series about different tools that I love. Some of them are more prescriptive, and they do give you an answer. We'll link the playlist to those episodes of the tools to work your way, the different frameworks and assessments and things that I really love. But what I think the Enneagram does better than any other tool is that it gives you a language and insight to identify patterns that you may not have seen, or maybe you couldn't connect the dots on before. It gives you the insight into these kind of subconscious or unconscious things that are sometimes in the driver's seat of how we behave and how we show up to others. So all of that being said, there is a ton of practical stuff you can do with this tool. I just think that you kind of have to dive in a little deep early in the process, because it is so important to take that first step well, finding your type. So more on that later when we talk about type. But before we get into these kind of top 5 things that I really wish people would know, or the things that people get wrong, I want to talk a little bit just about personality. And Enneagram is often described as a personality assessment or a personality tool. And what does personality really mean? Now, if I were writing a paper in 6th grade, I would start out with Webster's dictionary defines personality as, or maybe today I would reference ChatGPT. But personality is our patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving. Or they're these kind of traits or characteristics that we have and that we show to the world. Now, our personalities develop both through nature and nurture. Our inborn temperament, which is the nature part, kind of gives us this raw material. It's kind of the thing that we come into the world with. And then while our environment and our life experiences are shaping those things, that's the nurture part, that's how this raw material is kind of getting formed into something. Now, when we're born, we already have this kind of unique disposition that is genetic. It's not learned. That's the kind of raw material. It's the nature. Like our energy levels, our emotional reactivity, how sensitive we might be, or the way that our brain operates in a way. And that disposition really influences how we perceive and respond to the world. Two different babies might be in the exact same situation and they're going to perceive it differently, right? Two adults are going to be in the same situation and they're going to perceive it differently. This temperament can be thought of as the foundation for our Enneagram type. It becomes the foundation for those personality traits and those coping mechanisms that we develop over time. And as we grow, our relationships, the cultural context that we're born into, our family dynamics, and all the early life challenges from not getting a bottle when you needed one as a baby, or any kind of trauma that we experience, or the type of community that we're born into. All these things shape how we reinforce and adapt and kind of protect this core that we came in with. And over time, personality becomes a combination of kind of these instinctual tendencies and the ways that we've learned to navigate the world, often unconsciously, based on what helps us feel safe and valued and connected. Because at the end of the day, our systems are designed to keep us safe, whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally. And while we may not have existential threats, like actual life and death threats all the time, we do perceive things like lack of belonging or limited resources as those things. Now, inborn temperament is the natural way that we're wired from birth, kind of like our emotional operating system. And it's what makes, one baby really easygoing and another one more sensitive, or one kid super active and one kid really cautious. And if you have children, you'll see, or if you're close to any children in your life, you'll see that they kind of have their own little senses of one kid in the same family might be very process oriented, want to do things the right way, and another one's just like jumping off the couch, doing flips, So these patterns show up in how we react to things, how easily we get frustrated, how we handle change, how we relate to people, how we connect with people. And over time, this temperament mixes with this environment, our family, our culture, our life experiences, and they really shape this thing called personality that we end up with today in our adult lives and have to work on. So not all personality traits obviously are negative. However, the things that cause us reactivity when we get triggered, those are the things that we work on and we grow. And Enneagram can really help us identify those things on a much deeper level and understand them. So with your Enneagram type, how it shows up for you, it's this combination of both. What that inborn temperament dictated is your kind of default state, which determines how you coped with the world and the challenges that you encountered. And then your beliefs and behaviors will get shaped by your upbringing and your experiences. So all of this leads me to the point that no two people with any Enneagram type are going to seem the same. There are so many factors that play a role, and not everything is evident from someone else observing you. And sometimes not everything is evident for ourselves. Sometimes we're not even aware of the subconscious or unconscious beliefs and fears and desires that tend to be in the driver's seat of our behavior. Okay, so with that context, let's get into it. I have the top 5 things I want to talk about, but I would love to hear your thoughts or questions regarding this tool, if any come up for you along the way. So the first thing that I wish people thought differently about is the Enneagram is a test that you take online. I cannot tell you how many times I'm in maybe even a social setting where I say I'm an Enneagram coach and people say, oh, I love it. And someone else asks, like, what is that? And they're like, oh, it's this test you take. And it's not a test, right? Enneagram is a framework. It's a tool. It's definitely not a quiz or an online assessment. And maybe this is me being a little bit of a stickler about language, but I hope that people see Enneagram as a system that they can work with versus it being a test that tells you your type. Now, online tests can be a great starting point, but they assess behavior and they assess conscious behavior. So if you think about it, you sit down on your computer and you're taking this assessment and you're answering questions about how you behave and the things that you do. It's assessing the behavior that you're conscious of. It's not assessing the behavior that you're maybe not conscious of. And it's not certainly assessing why you're doing those things. And so only about 40% accuracy is usually seen on these online assessments in terms of your top score being your top type. Now, using it as a starting point is very different. Oftentimes, in your top 3 is probably the right one. Not 100% of the time, but I'd say more like 70 or 80. Now, behavior and motivation are 2 separate things, right? I can be funny in a group of people. This is hypothetical, but I think I could be funny in a group of people. But I can be funny in a group of people, and I might be doing it for a lot of different reasons. So maybe I'm using it to diffuse the tension. Maybe I'm using it to diffuse the discomfort that I feel. Maybe I'm using humor because I learned to develop this coping mechanism because there was a lot of fighting in my house as a young person. Or maybe I used it to try to get accepted by people in my early life, right? And so this motivation behind the behavior is the thing that really helps us understand ourselves through the Enneagram. And you can't test what you're not aware of. Sometimes we are aware of these motivations, but sometimes they're subconscious. So as an example, behavior versus motivation, 2 people can be perfectionists. Think about someone who has a high attention to detail. They have really high standards. They always want to get everything right. Now, one person might be driven by this kind of fear of being bad or fear of making mistakes or fear of being wrong, and that person might be a type 1. Another person might have these same perfectionistic tendencies, but they're driven by a desire to avoid failure or to avoid shame or avoid not being accepted into a group of people or admired in some way. And maybe they're a type 3. So you can see that the same characteristics can come from 2 very different roots. Now, working with Enneagram as a tool helps you understand your personality on a much deeper level, both to really sort out that like nature and nurture. So that is why I think we shouldn't think about Enneagram as a test. It's really a tool for exploration. But if you're curious about how different personality traits show up in different people, I would encourage you actually to check out the series that we did on that. That's another series called Let's Talk About Labels. And we did 6 different episodes where we covered different ways that common personality labels show up for different people. Things like being a people pleaser. Lots of people say that they're a people pleaser, but there's many, many different ways that people please. And it shows up differently in a lot of different circumstances. And so in these episodes, we cover people pleaser, perfectionist, empath, overthinkers, optimists versus pessimists, and introverts versus extroverts. And I had a lot of fun with these episodes, having a co-host, a friend of mine, and also collecting voice notes from various people to get their experience and have them really weigh into how these traits show up for them differently. Okay, so misconception number 2 is the books and the websites are the authority. And I think that that's a pretty fair assumption, but it's not right. Now, most popular Enneagram content was created by, I'll be honest, like cisgender, white, wealthy men from Western cultures in the 70s and 80s. And this is inherently not going to reflect all lived experiences. And while many of these early researchers and authors were in the field of psychology, and I'm sure that they did great quality research, the representation of a diverse set of individuals probably was not what the population looked like, and it certainly didn't mirror the ways that we operate in the world today. Our behavior, the way that we express that motivation, that nature part that really gets shaped by identity, it's shaped by culture, it's shaped by neurodiversity and trauma that we experience and beliefs and values of the family that we grew up in. And so the context that we came from and the context in which we exist is made up of so many factors. And what I mentioned earlier about nature and nurture plays a huge role here. 2 individuals can have the same core motivation, and yet they are going to show up very differently based on all of these factors. So a type 8 with a core motivation to be strong and powerful and self-reliant might show up differently in a woman of color who might express strength very differently than a white male type 8, where that person might express strength in a more aggressive way, in a more loud way that a woman of color learned very quickly she could not be in the world. And so we have these external determinants of how we might be able to or safely express these motivations. Another example is if you think about an Enneagram type 1. They want to be good, to be right, to be free from criticism. And if you grew up in maybe an ultra-religious family, your definition of good and right is going to look very different than someone who maybe grew up in a very artistic family that valued self-expression and creativity. How your little brain shaped, this is what it means to be a good person, is going to be dramatically different. And so the way that these two people behave would be very different, but they might come from the same type. So all of this to say your truth is valid, even if it doesn't match the list of behaviors that you see online or in the really well-known books about Enneagram. Finding your type is more about deeply relating to that core motivation and seeing how it drives your unique set of traits and behaviors versus having your traits and behaviors match the type that's written in the book or the website exactly. You don't have to match that description to feel confident that that is your type. That's really your process. Now, I worked with a team, and this is, the kind of pattern of deferring to authority, I think, is fair and a way it's a norm in this world, right? But I worked with a team last year, and I remember I had them all take an assessment as a starting point. And of course, in the instructions, I explicitly kind of said, don't assume that this is your top type and all this stuff. Now, I went back and forth on email with a couple of them, and I was like, well, what do you think about this and this? And, this fit? How certain are you? And so some of them I suggested maybe you look at a different type. Maybe your number 2 type or your number 3 type. And I remember the person that was my point of contact, kind of the leader of the group, had at one point emailed me before the workshop and said, a lot of people have questions on why it's okay to change your type. And so can you answer that in the workshop? And I thought it was so funny because I actually didn't understand what they meant at first. And what they meant is, oh, well, the report told me this. Why is it okay to say I'm not that one? And so I think that's just common when we do something like that we're like, okay, the report is the output, and that's the thing that I trust. And that's not the case with Enneagram. And I cannot say that enough. Do not assume that the top type you might get on an assessment is the be-all, end-all. And so also really trust yourself in this process. If you're reading something online or in a book about your type or a type that you think you are, but you're like, well, that's not me at all. Really think about those layers of culture and identity, of race, of gender, of neurodiversity, and all the things that shape how you show up. And consider those things and how those might also be playing in a role in how you express that motivation. So don't assume the first answer is the right one. And I also will say we should never tell anyone else their type unless, one, you're a professionally trained practitioner of this tool, and 2, you have the consent from the person. Even I really, really try not to go around and push any of my own opinions on anybody. I will always, if I have something I really need to say, I will ask them if they want my thoughts and feedback. And of course, when people hire me, they want to hear what I have to say. But if some family member or friend has told you what they think your type is, tell them to mind their own business and do your own exploration. Trust yourself. Just know that sometimes it takes some reflection and observation and getting honest with yourself. Okay, number 3 is your type changes over time, or that you have one type at home and one type at work. And this is just not true, but it's something that people say a lot. And I often hear people say things like, oh, I love the Enneagram and I'm a 3 and a 5, or I'm a 7 at home, but I'm a 1 at work. And honestly, that's just not a thing. Your dominant Enneagram type does not change throughout your life, but the way that you express that core motivation often does. Now, we grow, of course, between our young adulthood and our later adulthood, between our teenage years and our early adult years. we're constantly encountering challenges and we're learning to cope with the world better. We're finding where maybe our personality is causing problems for us and we're working on those things, right? And so we go to therapy, we notice things, whether it's at work or in relationships that is not working for other people or not helping us along the way, and we work on those things, right? That's one reason that the same motivation might be at play for your entire life, but obviously you don't behave the same way now that you did in your early 20s. We also develop coping mechanisms and masks and adaptations based on our environment and our roles. And so actually, different stages of life might have you encountering different challenges and bring out different behaviors. And so the way we behave absolutely changes over time, but that core motivation that's in the driver's seat is either in the driver's seat more or less. Maybe you get into the driver's seat and you build some awareness and some regulation skills around those things, or the way that it's expressed changes because your circumstances have changed. So context really matters also here. When people say, I'm this type at home and I'm this type at work, sometimes it's because our relationships at home, whether it's a spouse and kids or parents or siblings or whatever, can be a lot more high stakes than relationships at work. Obviously, work is really important and security is important. However, we get most reactive with the people that matter the most to us. And we feel the threats of what we're trying to cope with. If we feel a threat of disconnection from someone that is a life partner, we're going to react much differently than if we feel a threat of disconnection from a casual friend that you just met a couple of months ago. And so thinking about how stress and safety and power dynamics even can play a role where they might amplify or kind of mute certain ways that we behave, whether it's at home or at school or in our partnerships or in our friendships. And so where the stakes are the highest is where you're often going to see the most reactivity. And that will be different for everybody. Some people, the highest stakes might be keeping a job and keeping that financial security. And some people, the highest stakes might be in their kind of primary relationships. So just a quick note on wings and arrows. These are things that I get asked about a lot. And what I would say is there are ways to look at how we move around the Enneagram. Sometimes we'll have what's called a wing, which different kind of schools of thought on this have different opinions, that the type on either side of our type, so I'm a type 3, so the type 2 or the type 4 would be possible wings for me. What that really means is if I said I'm a 3 wing 2, I'm a 3 with shades of 2 in it. And I see some of the 2-ness in me. But really at the end of the day, it's probably the way I'm expressing my type 3. But sometimes it's helpful for people to look at what's on either side of your type. And then the arrows that you sometimes see on an Enneagram diagram show how types are connected. And sometimes these are called stress and growth arrows, where maybe you move toward the behaviors of a certain type when you're thriving, when you're doing really well in your life stage. And sometimes you might move toward the behaviors of another type when you're in a lot of stress, in a really difficult situation, or things are really not going well. All of those things are maybe fun to look at, but I would say that's definitely not where I would encourage someone to focus first. Always, always, always think about your dominant type and get to an accurate type first and really work within that type. Now, there's also something called tri-types, where people say you have a type in each of the centers. You have 1 in the heart center, 2, 3, 4, 1 in the head center, 5, 6, 7, and 1 in the body center, 8, 9, and 1. And so you have this tri-type, and I don't really subscribe to that theory. The other thing, though, is I think a really important and interesting one. It's called subtypes. So this combines our type with a dominant instinct. And there are 3 core instincts that kind of help us survive that we lean on. Every single person leans on all 3 of these instincts, but we kind of have a certain stack of which ones developed as the most important ones or the ones that we really protect first. Now, this is incredibly important, and it can help you discern your type if maybe you're having a tough time figuring it out and overlaying the instinct with the type can kind of show different ways that the type can be expressed. That being said, I would probably not look into this until you've been exploring your type for a little while, or you feel like you have a pretty good understanding of your type. And most people really just need to observe themselves and get honest about who they are and some ideas about who you want to be to find your type. It's about honest reflection and observation and just spending some time with it. Now, if you are very nerdy though, and you're very interested in learning more about how these kind of early years and these dominant instincts form, what are the 3 instincts? What is an instinctual stack? All of that stuff I actually talked about in episode 42 with my good friend, Erin Bowdy. She is the best, most informed Enneagram expert that I know and a good friend of mine. We actually talk through how our early years can shape us and how an instinct will emerge as kind of the one that you protect the most. So again, that's episode 42. We talk about how our pasts affect our careers, but we go through each of those 3 instincts. Okay, misconception or thing that people get wrong about the Enneagram, number 4. Now, this is that the Enneagram is really about finding your type. And honestly, identifying your type is just the beginning. It's not the goal. Knowing your type is really actually only step 1 of the work. The real growth is in observing the patterns that you see over time, connecting those dots, and especially when under stress or in conflict, those are the times that our behavior really shows up in the least healthy ways. And we can really identify what is going on inside of my body, inside of my brain, inside of my heart right now in this moment. Once you know your type, the work honestly becomes about healing, becomes about noticing those things, what's going on in my body, and where am I right now? And am I really under a threat? My body's reacting to something in a way that it is threatening, and how can I get curious and understand what's going on and build some range in how I show up? When our patterns are playing out in the most kind of like tight reactive way, it's something happens and we respond, right? Stimulus and response. But when we can build range, that means we lengthen that time between stimulus and response. Something happens, we can take a breath and we can act with agency. And so we can show up in different ways. We have more range in how we behave. We have more range in how we communicate. We have more range in how we accept others. And we're moving kind of toward integrating, not being in the pattern of the type. So for me, what this looks like a lot of times, even now, the work that I'm doing years later and very deep into this tool, I'm a type 3, and type 3s are often driven by the desire to be successful, be seen as successful, be valuable and worthwhile in the world. Sometimes this looks like trying to garner admiration, but it also can involve a lot of image management. So how do I want people to see me, and how do I make sure that people see me that way? How can I notice when I go into that pattern? How can I get curious? And then how can I have agency in my actions? That's the important thing here. That's what we do after we understand our type. It's this kind of feeling compelled to do something based on the patterning versus taking a moment and acting with that agency. Now, when I'm trying to manage my image, oftentimes I can catch myself in the act. And so this happens in small ways and big, but there have been times where, as an example, somebody who feels a little draining for me, someone who I feel like drains my energy or takes a lot, and I feel exhausted after I spend time with them, they might ask me, hey, can you help me with this thing? And my compulsion, because I want to be valuable to people, that is a core motivation of a type 3, and my image management kicks in. I want to be someone who helps people. I want to be someone who gives my time freely to people who need me. And I want to be seen as this role model, and I have all the answers and I give great advice. And so how is that managing of that image going to cause me to maybe say, yeah, absolutely, let's meet. And you can take as much time as you want out of my day and have that impact on my energy. Versus if I take a step back and say, how much of my yes to this request is based on me wanting to manage my image, is based on me wanting to be seen a certain way, I can actually make a different choice. And I have, and I do. And this work for me is never going to be over. I notice new ways that I'm managing my image all the time. So what you do after you identify your type is the real work. And if you're curious about this and you want to hear a little bit more and just have some more examples, I would encourage you to check out episode 68, which again was with my good friend, Erin Bowdy. And Erin and I share a lot more about the kind of 2.0 of our own journeys with our types. We talk a lot about after we found our type, what's the work that we're doing now, years later, and being kind of really deeply involved in this tool. So check that one out. Okay. Number 5, we are finally there. And this is number 5 on my list of things that people get wrong about the Enneagram. And it's working with Enneagram is about self-improvement. Now, the Enneagram is not about fixing yourself, but I think we also have to define improvement. Define better. What is being better? What is self-improvement? What is personal growth? And if we really question our desire here around this, or the desire that society puts out there, what is it in service of? So if I am trying to improve myself in order to be more productive at work or get more done or be more successful and climb the ladder faster, I think that's a no. Like, Enneagram is not about improving, quote unquote, improving ourselves in order to get more shit done in the day. I think that if we think, though, about self-improvement being better, maybe being a better version of ourselves, if it's in service of a more empathetic world, then maybe I do agree with that. Now, growth looks like increasing our range, right? It's the ability to show up with more flexibility, not be triggered or reactive in as many situations, and actually just show up the way that we would like to, that feels aligned with our values and who we are and who we want to be, rather than kind of like defaulting to our type's go-to strategies and getting reactive or kind of being unpredictable in the way that we show up for our teams. And so Enneagram, honestly, I would say, has made me a better person. But it's because Enneagram has helped me be less judgmental of others when they're approaching things a different way than I would approach them. Being more patient with people when they have a different process to get to an end state, or they just operate differently for me. It's also helped me lighten this kind of reliance on this like achievement focus. But I think for me, the empathy comes in where it's like, the first step is, okay, I can allow people to be different than me. I can accept that people are different than me. And now I really can appreciate how people are different than me. And it just helps me operate better and collaborate better with people and be more accepting of the relationships that I have in my life. And so that appreciation of different styles and different approaches and different ways of being, and also some compassion for why we all are the way that we are, understanding, hey, there's really hard stuff that this person went through that is causing them to be this way. Having a lot more acceptance for people and compassion for how we get to where we are has been a really big part of my own work with the Enneagram. Now, true transformation really requires healing, as I mentioned, and not just kind of optimizing our behavior in a productivity hack kind of way. It's about bringing this kind of compassionate awareness to ourselves and to others and building that sense of inner safety. Hey, just because somebody rejected me doesn't mean that my belonging in this world is threatened. How can I build that for myself? And a lot of that for me has been through working with my own emotions and actually allowing myself to slow down and feel them. The other thing I would want to say here is that growth is not linear. So just know that we build our skills around how we relate to others and how we show up and how we do our work and all of these things. And our conditions can change sometimes. I actually just had a client yesterday that I was talking to about this. And she was wondering why last year she had it all together. And this year she's really got a lot of anxiety about certain things that seem nonsensical. And it's because her conditions changed a lot. And so this growth isn't linear. It's something that we have to know that we will get to a point of how we want to behave, and then things will change and we have to kind of recalibrate. But we should do that rooted in self-kindness and not in the desire to do more. Okay. So those are the top 5 things that I think people get wrong about the Enneagram. And again, I would love to hear your thoughts and questions. So please reach out. Now, I also do this work with teams in workshop format and team coaching, whether that's kind of bringing Enneagram to your team in an introductory workshop, helping people understand their type at a more basic level, or going much deeper into work on team dynamics. And most often I'll work with small teams, usually around 10 to 15, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the process is typically first, we assess each team member's type and how it shows up for them. Second, we map out the team to see where's the team strong, where might they have blind spots, what styles are dominant among the team, and which ones maybe aren't, where people might be getting left out or excluded, or their ideas are getting left behind. And so thinking about the map of the team, and then we move into team sessions. And this can be one session or a series of sessions, going through these team dynamics and really workshopping ways to build better team processes. If there is a blind spot in a certain area, can we build a system around that, right? Or implementing very simple systems for things like one-on-one meetings or how we prep for a big decision to make sure that everybody is able to bring their best to the table, build more effective communication on the team and with other business partners outside of the team, and ultimately drive better business results. So my contact information is always in the show notes if you want to reach out. I hope you enjoyed the conversation about the top 5 things that I think people get wrong about the Enneagram. And again, I would love to hear your thoughts.